I'm a physicist, so this will be a sort of physical view on some mathematical questions, and I would like to share with you some problems related to topology of polymers in dense phase when they are collapsed, when they form drop-like structures. So, and the presentation will consist of 3 parts. First, I will remind you what is the fractal structure and the fractal dimension of a long unknotted polymer ring put in a small box. So you can imagine that you have a bounding box and you put inside the ring very long polymer chain, which is unknotted. So then you shake your box and thermalize the system. And then finally you ask what will be the geometrical structure of the polymer chain. And that question was addressed in many papers, and it's related to it has some biological applications. And I will, this is something old, I would say. And the next question, which is new one, is, if you wish, the inverse one. So suppose that you create somehow a polymer with a fractal dimension, not as of a usual random walk, but of fractal dimension bigger than of the random walk. I would remind you that the fractal dimension of the random walk of the Brownian motion is 2. So this is just because the typical distance between ends of the polymer behaves as square root of the number of steps. So this square root means 1/2. 2 is the fractal dimension. So, and the question is, I said the inverse one. It means that we create somehow the polymer with the fractal dimension higher than 2 and ask whether it's more knotted or less knotted than the usual polymers with the fractal dimension 2. And why this is important, I will tell you a bit later. And finally, I would end up with the related open question. So if you have many directed polymers, many random walks, which have some preferable direction, but they are placed near the convex surface, whether they are more knotted or less knotted than compared with the same system, but far away of any surfaces of convex surface. So these are three topics, and let me start with the first one. So I repeat again that this is a reminder, but here is just what I'm going to talk about. So we go from topology to the fractal structure, and the question we are interested in is what is the fractal structure of a long unknotted polymer ring in a small bounding box. So the next part will be inverse one. From fractal structure we will go to topology. Okay, so just a small reminder about physics. So the DNA molecule, because most questions arise from come from genomics, folding of DNAs in chromosomes, and so as we know, for instance, human DNA is a quarter of 2 meters long, contains about 3 billion base pairs, and is packed in very small region. So during the transcription, some microscopic fragments of DNA molecule need to unfold, so to come from this very dense drop-like structure. Then the information, so then the ribosome runs along this unfolded part, the information copies, and then this part should fold again. So the question is how to do that quickly and reversibly, because you can imagine that if you have very dense drop-like polymer chain in a small box, it's very, very difficult to to extract any microscopic part of the chain from it. Okay, so and there were some I would say artificial ideas, but maybe the breakthrough came after the works of Lieberman, Eiden, and others were published in Science in 2009. And this is an experimental work on structure of chromosomes in the nuclear cell. And the methods they used is known as genome-wide chromosome conformation capturing, abbreviation HiC, and it is more or less of the following. So here is the table they were able to obtain. So what is that? Suppose that you have, so here the red part is, you can imagine that this is a part of the DNA of the chromosome, and I and J are the, I would say, not nucleotides, but some number of some collection of monomers. So, and the question is, what is the probability of the fact that two different parts will be separated by the length of order of S is just I minus J, yeah, because I numerate monomers along the chain. So if this is I, so then I run, this is J's, and the length of this part is just I minus J, yeah. So I have this length of some part of DNA, and the question is what is the probability that this part is the ends of these parts are just nearby in the space. And what is shown here? This is so-called contact map, averaged over many realizations, but having the same primary structure of DNA. So here is the number of monomers. So you can imagine that here is I and here is J. So, and the brightness is the probability, is proportional to the probability. So you see that very close, the monomers which are close to each other along the chain, for instance, this one and the next one here, yeah, the distance between them is very small. So then the probability of having contact is very high. And here you see the white part. So the diagonal is just the line where this parameter S, yeah, is very small. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Okay, so therefore the probability of having very small loops is very high. But then when we go away from the other diagonal, and what is the distance perpendicular to the diagonal? It's just this S, is the distance between monomers separating the end of the part of length S. So when we go far away from diagonal, so S increases, and you see that the probability decreases. As you can see here, it has rather tricky structure, but first, researchers, especially in this paper, they were interested in the average how in average the density, the brightness decreases when we go away from diagonal. On average, they have seen that it decays as 1 over s, so it has power law decay. But what is important is the fact that it's just 1 over s, but not in 1 over s in some power. I will just explain you why this is important and what is the signature of this fact. Also, for future, what is important, I would just mention some resemblance of this structure and the artificial map, which looks like you see hierarchical structure resembling the Parisi ansatz, where you have small boxes, and these boxes, the probability is high of having contacts in these boxes. So then there are boxes of higher size, and the probability is smaller, and so on and so forth. Yeah, of course, it's maybe not immediately, but there is some link between these two structures, and I will pay attention to that a bit later. But first, let me explain you how the fractal dimension of polymer chain is related to this brightness, decrease of brightness, which can be measured experimentally. So, and what was determined in this high-C experiment? We can ask the following question, as I have just said. What is the probability in the three-dimensional space that ends of the segment of length s will be nearby? So we have segment s, and then we ask the question how we can estimate the probability that the ends of this red part will be close to in the space. And this is, of course, it's not very easy to compute exactly, but to estimate, it's not very difficult. Let's suppose that the typical size of this red segment is r, and then the fractal dimension comes into the play, and if s is the length of this part, so then the typical distance is s in power 1 over d fractal. And if this would be just a random walk, so then the fractal dimension is 2, and we have the typical, the very usual and very known relation that the ends of the polymer of length s, the size of the polymer of length s is typically square root of number of steps. Okay. So now to estimate the probability, we can just in three-dimensional space, we can say that this is 1 per volume. So the volume is r cubed. So therefore, we end up with this simple relation 1 over s in power 3 over d2. And therefore, you see that this probability is actually related to the fractal dimension, because measuring this probability and measuring the decay, we can guess about the fractal dimension. So if the decay is the decay is such as as I mentioned just here, 1 over S. We substitute it here and get the fractal dimension 3. But for the random walk, here should be S in power 3 over 2. Experimentally, it's very easy to distinguish between behaviors 1 over S and 1 over S in power 3 halves. And they found that it's 1 over S. So it means that the fractal dimension is 3. It means that the loop, so this loop has much more compact structure. So having that, there is a question. Okay, suppose that we know now the fractal dimension, how we can imagine what is the typical structure of the trajectory in three-dimensional space. And we come up with the question, how densely filled the space by linear chain such that every subchain is almost unknotted. And there are two options. One is such that we have a very long polymer chain, and suppose that we have two loops separated along the chain. And in principle, we can imagine that these loops can penetrate each other. And if we would compute the entanglement of red and green part, so it will be, for instance, using Alexander polynomials or Jones invariants, they will be highly knotted. Just let me briefly mention that the red part and the green part, we can always we can speak about topology because we can always find the part where the corresponding terminal points are close to this to each other in the space. So we can actually consider two rings. Yeah. So and for rings, the topological invariants are well defined. So we can compute for instance, the topology. So another option is such that all these parts don't penetrate into each other and form sort of crumples. And these crumples are formed on all scales. So here, as I said, different chain parts penetrate into each other and entangle. And here, neck-boring monomers along the chain are almost neck-boring in the space and are weakly entangled. What scenario is realized? And after years of thinking, people come to the conclusion that the second scenario is realized, and the collapse of the chain can be schematically guessed in this following sequence of pictures. The chain makes folds on some small scale. So then this sausage makes folds again. So then this bigger sausage makes folds again, and so on. And finally, we have something like Hilbert or piano curve, which has folds on all possible scales, starting from some microscopic one. And just to see that there is a hierarchy, I have emphasized different scales, and you see that, in fact, here we can see some fold embedded in folds, embedded in folds, and so on. Therefore, we have real hierarchy. And this important work I have mentioned was published in 2009. It was a work partially experimental, partially numerical, where the researchers found this kind of behavior. What is shown here? So you see that there are some territories, so the colors are well separated. What is that? You take very long polymer chain and you paint it from one end to another one, just in rainbow colors. So therefore, the colors are continuously changing from one end to another one. So therefore, if you fold this chain as in a small box, again, the experiment is, as I said before, you painted your chain from one end to another one. So then you make a ring, and then you put it in a small box and you shake it. And the typical structure is shown here. So this is the typical snapshot of numerical simulation of some experiment. And you see that the colors are well separated in space. They form sort of territories. What does it mean? It means that the chain parts close to each other along the chain are close to each other in space. And the whole structure, I would remind you, the whole structure, we started only with the condition that the whole structure is unknotted. No other restrictions we have imposed. Of course, the chain has some sort of volume interactions because otherwise numerical simulations cannot be done because it's unphysical. And now you see that this is related to something which is important for biology, because here is the schematic representation of this crumpled structure, but shown in more sophisticated way as piano curve in three-dimensional space. But the structure is almost the same. You see the colors are well separated, and the structure is such that folds are embedded in folds, and so on and so forth, and they are not well mixed. And this resembles the well-known structure of fast food. And in fact, this resemblance is not artificial. And the fact that this spaghetti is has the structure shown here is very very natural, because what we should do, we add a water, we add a hot water to this structure, and if this will be just sort of like dense drop of mixed spaghetti, so then the water will not fastly penetrate in, because the folds will not be open. But having such kind of structure, you see that when we add the water, immediately the parts of which are on the surface, they open and then release the water to penetrate deeper, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the salvation of this kind of thing structure is much more fast than if it would be just absolutely densely mixed and entangled. Okay, so now okay, so this is some these are some hand-waving arguments, but to come to closer to the physics, we can consider two-dimensional structure. I will run quickly through that, and just the question which is interesting for mathematicians. So suppose that you create a carpet, and you create it in such a way that you randomly put over and under crossings. Yeah. So you have such kind of lattice, you randomly put over and under crossings, and you ask the question, what is the typical complexity of this knot? Yeah, you can always take boundary conditions in such a way that this is a single loop. Okay, so you randomly put over under crossings, and you ask what is the typical complexity in ensemble of randomly generated carpets. And immediately, so this question was addressed many times by mathematicians, and what is known that it's highly entangled. So the complexity is very high, is proportional to number of crossings. I will not tell you how it's possible to do. It's possible to do analytically because it can be mapped to some sort of spin glass model. It can be estimated using topological arguments. Okay, but now we ask the different question. Suppose that I'm so clever that I have created under and over crossings in such a way that I know that this is for sure is trivial knot. Yeah. So I consider the sub-ensemble of such lattices where under in the over crossings are organized in such a way that we have always a trivial knot. And now what we do the following: we just cut part of this lattice and reclose the ends, and we ask whether the remaining part is closer to trivial, or whether it knows that it is a daughter part of the parent knot, which is trivial. And the answer is yes. And there were some works showing that there is huge, I would say, drastic memory about the initial structure. So, and this memory, how we can work with that, so we can use braid representation, then consider conditional braids where, okay, so I will not pay much attention to that because this was, I talked a few times about that, but just to summarize what is known, what is obtained. So having the trivial topology and putting the random path in a small box, we end up with the fractal structure such that the fractal dimension is 3. Yes, I forgot to tell you that the fractal dimension of this is 3, just because, okay, as it was shown here. So because any subpart is, if you wish, is collapsed in itself. So the parts close to each other in space are close to each other along the line, are close to each other in space. They form dense drops which are separated from themselves, from other such drops in scale in the space, and this happens on all scales. Okay, and now let us reverse this question and ask: if we would create somehow the polymer with a fractal structure such that it has a fractal dimension higher than 2, for instance 3, would it have more trivial topological structure than the polymers with the fractal dimension 2? Why this is important? So I repeat this again. So we know that the collapsed unknotted polymer in 3D has a fractal dimension 3. Now we revert this question and ask if the fractal dimension is higher than 2, for instance 3, are the corresponding path less knotted than the ordinary chain with fractal dimension 2? And why this is important? So you know that to play with topology is some sort of playing with topology is a very difficult question because, especially analytically, because you should use non-commutative invariance and at least, and also if you compute the topological invariant numerically, also you cannot go far away for very long chains. So therefore, there is a question. Maybe if we would relate somehow fractal dimension and topology, maybe we can forget about topology at all and say that maybe we can mimic weakly knotted polymer loops in dense phase, just as a Brownian motion with the fractal dimension, which is larger than 2. So then we can wash out the topology at all and just play with the fractal dimension, and generating the polymers with some given fractal dimension is something which is well known. So therefore, we ask the question, we create somehow the polymers with a fractal dimension 3 and ask whether they are less knotted or not than the polymers with the fractal dimension 2. So first, there is a question how to generate the polymer conformations with fractal dimension larger than 2. And here, let me show you a few equations. So we can compute the distribution function between monomers located in point X, different points. And typically, as usually, we have an action. So what is that? What is written here? So here is the typical connectivity part, the just quadratic interactions between monomers which are nearest neighbors along the chain. And here we add some extra potential. And this, the choice of this potential is a bit tricky. It has the following structure. So suppose that this is a polymer ring, and let me pay attention to the monomer, this xk. Okay, so now, according to this representation, it has standard relations with the next one and the previous one, and the black backbone, so this waved black backbone is just the quadratic interaction between neighboring monomers along the chain. So xk, xk plus 1, xk plus 1, xk plus 2, xk plus 2, xk plus 3, and so on. Okay? And now we add extra potential, and this potential is as follows. We say that not only nearest neighboring monomers interact along the chain, but also xk and xk plus 2, they interact also. But the strength of this interaction decreases as a function of the distance along the chain between these two monomers. So you see, it's written here. So we have quadratic interaction as we had here, yeah, xk minus xk plus 2, so squared. So therefore, there are still harmonic interactions, but the rigidity of this spring, if you wish, decays as a function of the distance between these two monomers along the chain. So, and so then we proceed in such a way. Again, we introduce the interaction between xk, xk plus 3, but the strength of this interaction is even smaller. Between xk and x plus 4, it's smaller again, and so on and so forth. And there is a power law decay. We suggested the power law decay. Why? So it's hard to say. It was sort of trial function, but I will tell you what is the result of this choice. So, but first, let me show you that there is a resemblance with the structure, hierarchical structure I have mentioned before. Not literal, but at least some connection you can find here. So the strength of interaction depends on the scale. Yeah, the more distant monomers interact have weaker interaction than the monomers which are separated by shorter parts. Okay, so now having this potential, in principle, everything can be done. We can diagonalize this action. We can diagonalize this action and compute the partition function, and the answer is that the following. So we can compute the probability distribution, and using this probability distribution, we can compute the end-to-end distance between monomers K and M separated in space. We can compute the average distance between the monomers, and you see that the fractal dimension enters here. So the decay of this exponent gamma, which tells you how the interaction decays, controls this fractal dimension, and the answer how the fractal dimension is linked to this power law decay is written here. So what we can see, so we can play now with the strength of interactions, with the strength of these hierarchical interactions, and mimic polymers with different fractal dimensions. So if gamma lies between 2 and 8/3, so the fractal dimension is larger than 3. The terminal, the fractal dimension is equal to 3 for rather strange value 8/3. And if here the exponent is larger than 3, so then we end up with the fractal dimension 2. For any gamma larger than 3, we have the fractal dimension of a structure equal to 2. So it's interesting that even if you have power law, not exponential, but power law memory along the chain, but which decays sufficiently fast, so then you reproduce the polymers with a fractal dimension 2. Just one short link with something which is well known. So we played with the disparate action and have added some this hierarchical potential. But what is known also, and after Mandelbrot, we know so-called fractal Brownian motion. So this is the action which can be schematically written like that. So there is velocity in one point, velocity in another point, and the correlation function which tells you how these parts decay, how this velocity decays. So if you select the kernel in power law form, and you especially and you apply again the same relation, so then you immediately end up with the former expression. You can compute again for this continuous Brownian motion, fractal Brownian motion, the probability distribution and end-to-end distance. So why I have mentioned this transparency? I would say that the question which is very interesting to my point of view is the following. We have fractal Brownian motion, and we ask how fractal Brownian motion is entangled, is knotted. For instance, it's an open question. What is the winding number of fractal Brownian motion around one obstacle? And we were thinking about that, but still have not published any results. Okay. So Now, having this in hands, we can try to do something numerically and to stabilize the structure of collapsed polymer on top of the interactions, which is these hierarchical interactions. We have added some repulsive volume interactions. And so then we can compute the the critical exponents. These are analytical computations. We can compute the critical exponents and show, look whether they are consistent with numerical simulations or not. Okay, so some results. So here are some snapshots of fractal Brownian motions with different fractal dimensions in three-dimensional space. So this is the typical Brownian motion of fractal dimension 2. You see that it looks like sparse random walk. So then we increase the fractal dimension, it becomes more dense. So, and then we increase again, even higher, and we see that actually the territories are formed. So you see that the colors are well segregated in space and form sort of territories. Let me tell you that we have painted our chain in the same way from one end to another one in rainbow colors. So if we have put our polymer in a bounding box, a long polymer in a bounding box, and wait for some rather long time, so we see that actually there is well segregated structure where these colors don't mix. And again, as in the former picture, when we, so nu is the fractal dimension, 0.5 is the standard Brownian motion. So then we, when we decrease it, so it goes to 1/3. So you see that the structure becomes more and more separated the colors become more and more separated. So having this, we can try to compare different polymer conformations qualitatively, and as usually we can use the Alexander polynomial computed at some special point, and of course it's mathematically not rigorous, but for physical needs it's sufficient. So the Alexander polynomial computed at this point of the parameter distinguishes sufficiently well different topological conformations, and so this is sufficient for our statistical computations. So what we can see. So we computed the distribution of knot complexity for fractal Brownian rings of length about 16,000 monomers in a bounding box with different fractal dimensions. So when the fractal dimension, so let me start from black to blue. When the fractal dimension is 0.5, so this is the standard random Brownian motion. So you see that the distribution of knots is very broad, and there are many knots with big with sufficiently large complexities. When we decrease the fractal dimension, we cannot go exactly to 1.1 or 3 because it takes very long time, but the tendency is seen. When the fractal dimension becomes larger and the corresponding critical exponent gets smaller, so then we see the tendency of shrinking of this distribution. So already for rather compact polymers in a bounding box, you see that the distribution becomes very narrow. Yeah, and there are no highly knotted structures. So therefore, we can at least on this qualitative level, conjecture that, not conjecture, come to the conclusion that the compact random Brownian path with a fractal dimension larger than 2 are less knotted than the ordinary globules with fractal dimension equal to 2. So, our observation could provide a possible tool to mimic chains with topological interactions, but forgetting washing out the topological interactions. Let's just, for instance, you are interested in the behavior of compact polymers in very dense, with very high density. So, and you would like to pay into attention all possible interactions, including topological ones. So then I would say that this is almost impossible, because to play with topology of a highly entangled dense system is something out of computer possibilities. So therefore we say, okay, forget about topology. Let's create polymers with a special fractal dimension and control this fractal dimension. So then we can be sure that since there is a fractal dimension, the unique correspondence of fractal dimension and topology, we can say that we can control the topological structure by controlling the fractal dimension. Okay, so this is what concerns this part, and there is an open question, a related open question of the following type. Since we now understand that there is a relation between fractal dimension and topology, let's consider the system where also some interaction with the external interaction change the fractal dimension. So, and let us consider entangled two-dimensional random walk, okay, quasi two-dimensional random walk near the convex boundary, or specifically the situation we would like to be to consider is like that. So we have cylindrical structure in this direction, yeah, or just semicircle, and you have random walk which winds around, runs from the point A to the point B. So, and it cannot enter inside this gray region. If this random walk is very long and such that the number of steps is much bigger than the size of this semicircle, so I would say number of steps is of order of square of this, yeah. So then, so it means that the picture is not very appropriate. So we have very long random, we have very long loop and rather small convex part. So then we are interested in what is the typical span of this trajectory along above the point O, yeah, here or here, everywhere. And since this is just a random walk, so this behavior is like that. So the typical span is square root of number of steps. This is nothing special. But now, if we say, let us stretch our trajectory, so it means that we say that the number of steps is proportional to the typical semi-arc, semicircle length of this semicircle. Yeah, so R is the radius of this part, and the number of steps is proportional to the radius, linearly proportional. So then immediately so this the brief computations I will show you. Immediately you come to the conclusion that the behavior is not square root anymore, but it has exponent, the fractal dimension 3, exponent 1 over 3. The same is true for the diffusion of in directed diffusion in non-uniform channels. This is closer to flows in complex geometries, or you can say that there is sort of passive scalar which moves and interacts with the boundaries. So we have random walk, which can go with larger probability along the chain, smaller probability back, and equal probabilities in perpendicular directions. So there are two options. So if you run your random walk from the point B, so and then it goes somehow and it doesn't interact with the boundaries. But you can run it from the point somewhere close to the boundary, and then what will happen? It will slide along the boundary and then go away. Here is the more detailed representation of this picture. So you start your random walk somewhere here. So then it hits the point A, it goes along the boundary, and then it deviates from it, and then it runs away. The question is, what is the typical size, what is the typical tube in which this random walk runs, slides along the boundary? And this is just the something which is related to the fractal dimension, and as I said before, and this is exactly as in the previous slide, the typical span, the typical tube in which this random walk fluctuates, behaves as cubic root of the number of steps. So the fluctuations are much suppressed with respect to the standard fluctuations of random walks. Just brief how this can be computed, just the idea, the hand waving arguments. So we have a stretched random walk above the semicircle, and we consider the part between points A prime and B prime, only this part, and we ask, suppose that we can say that this is such part that it can be replaced by, we can forget about the curvature. So if we can forget about the curvature on this length, so then we can linearize the curved shape, and the typical horizontal distance will, so this is just the Pythagorean theorem. This will behave like that, yeah, where y is the normal direction. Y is this normal direction. Okay, so and now we say that, okay, so since we have linearized this part, so then above this flat part we have a typical random walk where x plays the role of time and y is its height. So then we have just square root of number of steps. And collecting these two equations together, so we have this kind of, we just substitute y here, yeah, and we end up with the fractal dimension 1 over 3. So therefore, if we have uniform, shape like semicircle, so then everywhere we will have the typical span of cubic root of r. So, and now the following question, and that is the end of my talk. Now the following questions arises. So consider, suppose that we have not a single random walk, but we have a bunch of directed random paths, and we put them near the convex shape. All of them are put in the same are put in some region near the convex shape. So therefore, they will have fluctuations which are suppressed with respect to Gaussian one, and they'll behave as with the fractal dimension 3. Is it true that the corresponding braid will be closer to trivial, will be less knotted, less entangled than the braid of direct random walks far away from the convex boundary? I don't know the answer to this question, but I guess that the answer is positive. And that might be interesting because we can change the topology of some sort of, as I say, tracers, because like vortex lines, a bunch of vortex lines, if we put them near some convex boundary. I would say that near the concave boundaries, this doesn't work. Near the flat boundaries, this doesn't work at all. So therefore, only near the convex boundaries, it works. And so corresponding work is in progress. So probably I should stop here. I am obliged to end up with the transparency, which is like that. So, and with the slide, which is like that. And thank you for attention.